Okay, so welcome to this part 3 of this set of lectures on Monte Carlo, the intertwining between Monte Carlo methods and optimization. So yesterday afternoon, the second lecture was on if I have a mechanism that sample points from what I called yesterday a controlled Markov chain, a controlled mechanism, what are the sufficient conditions on this mechanism in such a way that we have a convergence in distribution or other limit theorem on the points. Today I am on the other side, the side of the optimization, which means that I will consider not all possible techniques of optimization, but just what is called the stochastic approximation. And so in that case, I will emphasize the situation when what I call Markovian dynamics, which means that the points which are used in the update scheme of the stochastic approximation are sampled from the same mechanism as yesterday. That is, they are sampled from at iteration t, we use the point xt. At iteration t plus 1, we use the point xt plus 1. And the next point is produced from the previous one by using a transition kernel starting from xt and indexed by the current value of the parameter. So stochastic approximation was introduced a long time ago by Robbins-Monroe, and it's a family of algorithms that are designed to solve the following problem. We want to find the root of a function h. So let us say that we want to find the root on Rp of a function h, but in the situation when this function is not explicitly known, cannot be evaluated, but is defined through an expectation. An expectation here, which in my case, I allowed both the integrand, the function here, and the distribution to depend upon the parameter theta. Pi theta, as yesterday, is a probability distribution. So the algorithm runs as follows. As a user, you first have to choose a deterministic sequence. Usually you at least require that the sum of the gamma does not converge. And you choose this sequence, you choose an initial value, and you define a sequence of parameters, theta t, by this scheme. The next point equals the previous point plus the step size, which is also called sometimes the learning rate, gamma t plus 1, multiplied by capital H. So in a perfect world, you would like to introduce here h of theta t, but h, the mean field h, is not known, and what you are doing here is you replace this exact expectation by a Monte Carlo sum reduced or computed this Monte Carlo sum with a single point, a single draw. So this is quite interesting from a computational cost point of view. So in our case, the point xt is drawn, as I said, the point xt is drawn as a function of the previous point and the current parameter theta t by a Markov kernel which is designed in such a way that it admits pi theta t as its unique invariant distribution. So it is typically in situations when you are not able to sample exactly from pi theta. When you study this kind of algorithm, so what you would like to prove is that the sequence of theta t converges to the minimum of the function or to the set of the minimizer if it is not reduced to a point of this function h. And I would say roughly there are two sets of proof in the literature. The first one, when you compare this algorithm to a continuous time mechanism, which is defined here by this ODE. You prove that the ODE has an asymptotic behavior, and then you show that the discretize, that your algorithm here, which can be seen as a discretization, a time discretization of this ODE plus a perturbation. So you prove that this perturbation, this discretization remains close to the deterministic path of the ODE, close enough in such a way that it inherits the asymptotic behavior of the ODE. And the other strategy is that you don't use this ODE techniques, you use more Lyapunov, but a Lyapunov for the discrete time version, Lyapunov techniques, and you remain on the domain, in the domain of the discrete time, never on the continuous time domain. So for the update in practice, when you implement this algorithm, of course, you use this equation, but when you do math, in order to understand the behavior of this kind of algorithm, you will write your algorithm as the exact one, the perfect one, where you introduce here the mean field, plus the step size multiplied by the approximation of the unknown quantity by a Monte Carlo sum reduced to a point. So, in our case, with our case meaning in situation where the point is sampled by this mechanism, there is a special trick which makes the proof a bit more complex, a bit more technical with respect to what exists usually in the literature. Is the fact that we introduce this quantity, the error which is introduced at each iteration here, this quantity, is biased. Biased, indeed. Usually, the classical situation is when the point xt plus 1 is sampled under the current distribution pi index theta t. In that case, the mean value here of the quantity of the approximation, capital H, given the past, theta t is in the past, so it is the mean value with respect to x, the distribution of x given the past, and you see that it is exactly pi, so this quantity equal to H, which means that the difference here is centered. In our case, this property doesn't hold anymore, which means that it doesn't hold anymore because it doesn't hold anymore because the conditional distribution of xt plus 1 given the past is not pi, but is a Markov kernel, is a one-step transition of a Markov kernel having pi as invariant distribution. So in the error, the mean value is not 0, but it is given by the function h integrated by this difference of distribution, the difference between the one iterated kernel and its invariant distribution. Roughly speaking, so your algorithm, in the case of what I call Markovian dynamics, your algorithm is a perturbation of the time discretized ODE, but you add at each iteration, you add here a perturbation which is non-centered, which may cause some troubles if you don't take care on how to choose gamma t and on the property you will require here on the transition kernel. So the objective of this talk is to give you the intuition of all these properties on the transition kernels and on the choice of the step size sequence in order to ensure that your algorithm will converge to the roots of the function h. So is the bias vanishing? There are two strategies when you sample with this mechanism. You could decide to force the bias to vanish by approximating here the quantity small h, not with the Monte Carlo sum computed with one sample, but you could decide to increase the number of Monte Carlo points at each iteration, saying that at iteration t, you sampled mt plus 1 points, so you have a sum here with many points, and in that case, the difference of the distribution, or let us say at least the mean value decay as roughly the intuition, but 1 over the number of points. So this idea that you will force, in some sense, the bias to vanish, but of course you are not in the stochastic approximation rule, you are in the situation of what we call the mini-batch. So on the computational cost point of view, you don't like this approach because you increase the computational Monte Carlo cost at each iteration. If you want the bias to vanish, it means that when t increases, when the number of iterations increases, you decide to increase the number of points, so the computational cost increases, and you don't want that. You would like really to find a solution in the stochastic approximation rule, which means in the situation where mt equal 1 at each iteration, 1 or 10, let us say a fixed number at each iteration. No. It's when I sample one step, I restart from the previous one, and it is previous point. No, sorry. When I sampled empty, it is empty is from, yes, it is said, it is a Markov chain starting from the previous point, the last, okay. It means that here I have at time t, at iteration t, and here iteration t plus 1. So iteration t, I produce one sample until empty points, and I use this one as the initial one here, and then I use this mechanism to produce the point number 1, again the same kernel to produce the point number 2, which means a path of a Markov chain having phi theta t as kernel. Not independent, but a path of Markov chain. And what plays a role in the proof that the first point is the last one of the previous iteration. There is a chaining mechanism, and you will see that it plays a role. What is the idea when you want to prove convergence of this kind of schemes, of this stochastic approximation scheme? The idea is that you use the fact that you have to use the fact that your algorithm processes that your problem, the mean field H, is associated to what we call a Lyapunov function, which means that you are able to find a function V, which is non-negative, in such a way that along the algorithm, along the path of the algorithm, the function V at the new point is upper bounded by the function V at the previous point, minus the quantity which is positive or 0, means it's non-negative, minus something, plus a noise. If you are able to know exactly the mean field small h, in that case, you don't have the noise. But when you don't know the mean field, which is always the situation in stochastic approximation, you have this additional term, which means that you don't have a strict decay along the path. So this Lyapunov function is not decaying along the path, but it's decaying up to a perturbation. And the idea is to say that if this perturbation is controlled enough, in some sense, your path will inherit this descent behavior, and the algorithm will converge to the set where this term is 0 and which is related to the root of h. We will see in more detail, but this is the idea. So this Lyapunov function is usually as this form. I mean that if the set of points where the term here is 0 is the red one, it is enclosed. We assume usually that it is enclosed in one level set of the function V. It doesn't matter if you don't know which one, but you know that there exists a level set that contains the fixed point, the limiting point of the algorithm. And then you say you also have to assume usually that all the level set of V are compact, and then V tends to infinity in such a way that you can cover the state, the RP, let us say, by the level set of V. So the convergence analysis usually is in two steps. First, you have to prove, is in two steps, not usually, but is in two steps. First, you have to prove that the sequence is stable, which means that there exists a compact subset which may depend on the path. There exists a compact subset that contains the path, theta t, and then when you know that the sequence is stable, it's the preliminary step to prove the convergence. The convergence, here again, you have different levels of conclusions. First, you can prove quite easily, under the assumption that you have convergence to the set. Sometimes with an additional small condition, you may prove that you have convergence to a connected component of the set in the situation when you don't know if there is a single component or not. And sometimes you add another conditions in such a way that you can prove that you have convergence to a single point in the set, which is a quite strong, quite interesting conclusion, but at the cost of, at the price of a quite strong conditions. on the structure of the limiting set, and quite often it may happen that you are not able to pose this kind of conditions on the topology of the limiting set. So stability in our case is a crucial point. In our case, meaning in this sampling scheme, is a crucial point. It's a crucial point because here I said that in the Lyapunov decay, I have this additional term. And even if I don't do the proof explicitly, what happens is that this additional term is, roughly speaking, related to this quantity. This quantity, which is the step size, multiplied by the error introduced at each iteration. So in some sense, it is the sum of the cumulated error. In our case, the point xk plus 1 are sampled from this kernel, but if you want to show that this quantity is controlled, you will have to, it will require information on the distributions of the point xk, and so it is an echo to the lecture yesterday, the second lecture yesterday afternoon. When you want to have information on the distribution of the point xk when they are sampled from this dynamics, you need some containment conditions, some diminishing adaptation conditions, you mean some regularity conditions, and as said yesterday, it is far easier when you know that the sequence of parameters which is used remain in a compact set. So you are really interested in this sampling scheme. You are really interested in proving first that your algorithm is stable, because it will allow you, after that, to have simpler conditions for the convergence analysis. So, what exists in the literature as techniques to make the stochastic approximation stable? It's not a full review, but three situations. The first one is to say that the algorithm is stable by definition. I would say that, sure, maybe in some cases it may happen, but it's quite unlikely. It's quite unlikely, and in examples I consider, usually it is really unlikely. So I don't like to claim to have as a first claim, as an assumption, that the algorithm is stable by nature. So I forget this approach, and I try to prove it. So the second possibility, the solution which is advocated in the literature is to say that we can force the algorithm to be stable, which means that you perform your update rule, the previous point plus the increment, and then if it is not in the compact, a compact chosen by the user, fixed before running the algorithm, you project the point on this set, to the set with a nice topology, so that projection is quite easy, of course, but you force the algorithm to remain in the compact set. So here it means that you have to take into account this modification of the initial updating scheme in your proof. And at the end, of course, the limiting point will be in the limiting set and in this projection set. And usually we don't really like that, because we are not able to have information on where is this limiting set. So maybe you will define the user is not able to find a compact set which will enclose the limiting set. Maybe it's just a part, and you may have spurious behaviors like a convergence to a boundary of the compact, or convergence outside, because you forget. Maybe the very bad situation is when this quantity is empty. So if you have no idea of where L is, it may be quite difficult. So personally, I don't like this approach. And so today I decided to comment a lot the third solution, a third solution, which was proposed some years ago by Chen, Guo, and Gao, and which is called the projection on growing compact subsets. Yes? For projection? Oh. Usually the function h is fixed by your problem, you can modify, you can multiply h by something which is never 0 and you don't modify the root of the mean field. So h is not uniquely defined, I agree, but gamma, yes, in that case, if you force gamma, it means that you choose gamma as a function of theta t. To ensure, you can do that, but it's not exactly the scheme that is, you can try that given this point, you test many step size until this quantity is not, remains in the compact. You can do that. In that case, it's not exactly the framework I recommend because you are trying many step size and so you are making a step size which is random because it depends on the path, on the theta t, through theta t, for example. And it's not exactly me. I recommend the situation when before running the algorithm, the user fixes a step size sequence, but it could be a solution. I don't know, there exists, but on specific problems, there exists results on the convergence of such stochastic approximation scheme when the step size sequence gamma t is random. Is random because it is based on the past behavior of the algorithm. So me, I say in the situation where gamma t is deterministic, fixed before running the algorithm, and I want to know how I can make, is there a solution here to make the algorithm stable by definition, up to some modifications, yes? Maybe, I will discuss after. Because something that I didn't comment is the choice of P here. I mean that there are many kernels, possible kernels with invariant distribution. For example, if P is designed to have a given invariant distribution, any iteration of P has this invariant distribution. So here I could perform from xt to xt plus 1, either use P or some iterates of P, which means sampling many points and just, okay. So you see, I did not comment, I don't know if it's equivalent to what you are saying, but since I did not say how to choose P, maybe here I have a level of flexibility to introduce the fact that they could have more efficient kernels P than other ones. I don't know, maybe. So what is the chain technique? The chain technique is a modification of the original algorithm. So the original algorithm, so as a user, you fix first the step size sequence. It is fixed. And the original algorithm, you have also, sorry, the initial value that I need. In our case, an initial value for the sampling scheme is also required. You say that theta 0 is theta init, x naught is x init, and the updating rule is this one. Where xt plus 1 is sampled by using the previous point and the current parameter. For the chain technique, the user has to fix first an additional quantity, which is a family of compact subset, let us say of RP. We are running on our algorithm on RP, compact subset, but growing compact subset. In such a way that the union of the compact is RP, let us say the ball, for example. Okay? So we have the compact number 0, number 1, number 2, and you initialize your algorithm, you choose theta naught in theta init in the compact number 0. And then you start the classical updating rule. Theta 1, theta 2, you start the algorithm, but you allow the algorithm to stay in the compact number 0. It may happen, so if it never leaves this compact, it's perfect. It means that the algorithm is stable by nature, it stays in the compact number naught. But certainly at some point, at some time, at some random time, here we have theta t, and maybe here we have theta t plus 1. Because, I don't know, gamma is too large, xt is too bad, I don't know, but globally, the path is outside the compact number knot. So in that case, you decide to stop and restart the mechanism. You forget this theta t plus 1, and you restart here saying that theta t plus 1 is theta init. But you don't restart exactly. You restart theta. Since maybe the theta t plus 1 here left the compact set, maybe it's because your point xt was not so good, so you decide also to restart. So when theta t plus 1 is not in cannot, you replace theta t plus 1 by theta init, x t plus 1 by x init, and you define theta t plus 2 as theta t plus 1 plus gamma h theta t plus 1 xt plus 2, having something xt plus 2 as usual. But here, maybe the step size was too large, so you decide to make the step size a bit, to shift the step size. Let us say the shift by 1, but any function of the number of restart, any increasing function of the number of restart is okay. So at the same time, every time it leaves the compact number knot, you decide to restart, but with a shifted step size sequence. Since usually you choose a step size sequence which is decaying, it means that you restart with a smaller step size sequence, which may help for the next block of iteration, which may help to maintain the algorithm in the compact. This time, you will allow the algorithm to stay in the compact number 1. You repeat your mechanism until it leaves, and maybe not in compact number 2, but very far away, somewhere away, and you repeat your mechanism, you stop it, you restart, exactly here as here. You restart with a shifted step size, and the shifted step size, which may be shifted by the number of stop and restart until now. Yes? Usually gamma is bounded, yes, because it goes to 0. In practice, you have at least the condition that the sum of gamma equal plus infinity, so it doesn't imply that it is bounded, but somewhere after that in the proof, you have that the sum of the gamma square is finite, which should imply that it is bounded. So in practice, yes, gamma is bounded. So you have this mechanism. What happens? There are two situations. Either the number of stop and restart is finite, almost surely finite because it's a random. But let us say it is finite. It means that after some random time, you do not restart anymore, which means that after some random time, you remain in the compact number L, let us say number L. So you define a stable sequence. The other situation is when the number of stop and restart is not finite. So it's not a nice situation. It means that even if you choose a decaying, a more and more shifted step size sequence, you are not able to control the perturbation, the noise here, and so your sequence leaves any compact ball. So you want to avoid this situation. And the next step will be to define sufficient conditions on the step size and on the sampling mechanism in order to ensure that this second situation will never happen, and we will be always in the first situation when the number of stop and restart is finite and most short. Observe that something which is important. Before the stop and the first restart, your sequence of theta was in the compact number knot. Before the second one, the second restart, it was in the compact number 1. And if at some times you stop and it remains in the compact number L, it means that all the points you produce, theta t, are in this compact number L because they are growing, the compacts are growing. So you have this nice property is that all the theta t are in a compact, in the situation where the number of stop and restart is finite. You also have the property that at some time, at some random time, x and theta are equal to the theta init and x init, the initial value. And after that time, you have the exact dynamic, that is, you sample the point always with this mechanism, and you have your updating rule, which is the new value equal the last value plus a step size multiplied by h. So you do not modify anymore this updating scheme. Yes?
But why do you use the same, go back to the same step size and not just continue? Because yes, it will slow down, but to restart more or less. For the step size.
For the step size, because I want to control. I want to control. Here again, I would say I don't want to make it random, but it's not true because capital L is random, is specific to each path. Maybe because I want to control, we will see in the proof that it is important to control the value here, to have knowledge on the value. So yes, it's more coming from the proof than from the. So now I would like, in a few slides, I would like to prove why, or to prove. I would like to identify a sufficient condition in order to ensure that the number of stop and restart is finite. I will have 3 or 4 slides for that. And there are a set of conditions which are not the weakest one that you can find in the literature, but I chose them so that the proof I can do after that is quite simple. So first I assume that, let us say we are running on RP, that we have a Lyapunov function which is regular, smooth enough, continuously differentiable, so that the compact set, we have a family of growing compact set, level set are compact, such that this Lyapunov, this function satisfies this property, gradient V scalar, the mean field is negative, so that when you are outside, so it's always negative, but it is strictly negative uniformly on any compact subset outside the capital L. And capital L, what is it? It is the set of points where this quantity is negative. And an assumption, you said that there is a level set of V which encloses this limiting set, this capital L set. But as I said, in practice, for the proof you need to say that, but in practice, the value of M naught is not required. Second assumption, you assume that your mean field is Lipschitz on compact subset. And the third assumption, I will use the fact that gamma t goes to 0. Yes? Gamma t? It goes to 0. So it depends, not really, because since it goes to 0, it will be below any Lipschitz constant. So in practice, it could depend. If gamma t were fixed, it could depend indeed on some quantities. But here, since it goes to 0, I would say that it's not important. Even if at the beginning it's not, it doesn't satisfy some condition, it doesn't matter because. What
I'm worrying about when you go to the next equation from another complex
with a large gamma t, you mean? Yes. If gamma t is too large, it means that you will reproject a lot. Before, since it goes to 0, after some time, it will be small enough in such a way that you will not reproject. So indeed, if you have not a good intuition to start your step size sequence at a nice initial value, indeed, you will observe many stop and restart before. No, I said projection, but I should use the term stop and restart. I don't have any projection. When I observe it is outside, So it is a simple test. If the compact are the ball, it is a test on the norm of your parameter. When it is outside, I restart. I do not project, I restart. So I have no cost of projection with this approach. So under this condition, the proof to identify a sufficient condition for obtain the self-stabilized stochastic approximation algorithm, the proof is in 3 steps. The first one, it consists in defining something which mimics what happened between 2 successive stop and restart. Between 2 successive stop and restart, you are defining a sequence T0, which starts from tau init, and then you apply this mechanism with rho t being one of the delayed sequence depending on which slice you are observing. So let us say that rho t is some sequence, positive sequence. And for the proof, I need to define an auxiliary quantity here, which is the previous one. Here it's not a typo, it's a really tau t, not a bar tau t, The same quantity than here, but here I don't put the perturbation. Here I have this kind of skeleton, tau bar t, and here I have tau t, which is really the mimics what happens between 2 stop and restart. The first step is to quantify the difference between these 2 sequences. So by a trivial induction, at the time 0 they are equal, so the difference is 0, and at time t plus 1, when you use the definition, it is equal to the norm, to the square is equal to this quantity. You classically develop H is your initial problem. All this machinery is to find the root of H, the mean field of the problem. H is the mean field. So it is the problem. So so it is just for the proof, this answer. There's no practical implementation, just for the proof you introduce this. And so what happens is that after time t plus 1, the error, the difference between these 2 sequences at time t plus 1 is the quantity at time t, the difference at time t, plus some terms. So by induction, you see that at time t plus 1, the difference, the distance to the square of these 2 sequences is upper bounded by this quantity. And when you observe what this quantity here, it is in some sense the cumulated error. It is the step size to the square multiplied by the error, eta k, to the square. So it is a way to measure, to count the cumulated error, plus something which is, again, a way to count the cumulated error, the sum of the step size multiplied by the error. Here you have something I did not comment, which are the tau k, but in our case it doesn't matter. But just to give you the intuition, the difference between these 2 sequences is a kind of measure of the cumulated error from the beginning. Second step. The second step is to say, that you can identify 2 quantities, rho max and delta max, in such a way that if the step size is small enough, if you are able to control, if you are able to control here this cumulated error by some delta max, if you assume that currently the sequence bar tau is in the level set number M1, let us say the dark blue, and the other one is in a larger level set, the light blue, in that case, necessarily the next point of this auxiliary sequence will remain in the dark blue set. I will prove the second step, this is a crucial one. And then the third step is quite simple, is to say that if this tau bar is in the dark blue, since you are able to control the error also at time t plus 1, the sequence of interest, tau t, will remain in the light blue. So let us prove this, second step. So it's based on it uses, of course, the Lyapunov technique, the Lyapunov information, because we have to show that it remains in some level set of the Lyapunov function. So we know that, we assume that the Lyapunov function was regular enough in such a way that I can write a Taylor expansion with an exact integral remainder terms. So I said that it is V at tau bar, the next tau bar point is upper bound by V is equal, sorry, to V at the current point plus the integral between 0, 1 of gradient of V at tau bar T plus lambda tau bar T plus 1 minus tau bar T scalar tau bar T plus 1 minus tau bar T d lambda. Now you use the fact that by definition this quantity is rho T plus 1 H of tau T. This quantity here is also tau bar T plus lambda rho T plus 1 H of tau T. In such a way, so here you use the fact that nabla V is Lipschitz, and even Lipschitz on compact. Compact is enough because tau bar, tau are in a compact set. Rho is controlled, lambda is controlled, H is regular enough so that all these quantities remain in a compact. Here again, so nabla V is Lipschitz, H, I will use also the fact that H is Lipschitz, the fact that H is bounded on compact. To say that all this quantity can be upper bounded by this rho T plus 1 multiplied by the scalar product of nabla V at tau bar T, scalar H of tau T, plus a term which is a constant, Lipschitz constant indeed, multiplied by rho square norm of H tau T square. So the here I write it is minus this quantity plus this quantity, and the minus this quantity, the difference of the V, is upper bounded by the Lipschitz property, and it gives you the rho square H square. Now you have this. This quantity is not exactly negative because I would like to use that this quantity is negative. I need tau bar here, so it doesn't matter. I introduce what I am interested in. I said that it is nabla V of tau bar T, scalar H of tau bar T, plus a constant rho T plus rho square norm. So the norm, I put it in the constant because H is bounded on compact set. I have this quantity plus here, since I introduced something different, I use the fact that H is Lipschitz on compact to say that it is, and this quantity is bounded on compact. So it is again a constant multiplied by T plus rho T plus 1 multiplied by the difference tau T minus tau bar T. The difference comes from the Lipschitz property of the H. So now there are two cases. Case 1, tau bar T, where is it? Where it is? It is in the dark blue level set. Two situations. If it is in the dark blue sorry, I want to say tau bar T plus 1. Yes, it is in the dark blue level set. So there are two situations. Either it is, it is also in the red part, which means that tau bar T is in the level set, the red one. In that case, from the previous inequality, the next point, I can say that it is upper bound by M naught. This quantity, I know it is negative, but I cannot upper bound it strictly by minus something because I am in the level set including the set of points where the scalar product is 0. So I'm not able to say that it is strictly negative. It doesn't matter. I forget it. It is negative. Plus, I have something that I decide to upper bound by M1 minus M naught in such a way that at the end, it is upper bound by M1. Is it possible to do that? Yes. It is sufficient to choose rho max and delta max. Delta max controls this term. It is possible to choose them in such a way that it is upper bounded by M1 minus M naught. This is for the case number 1. Case number 2. Tau bar. So tau bar is not necessarily in the red part. It may be in the margin. And so in the dark blue margin, which means that tau bar T is in the compact set defined like that. Far better, because it is a compact outside the limiting set in dark red. So in that case, I can say that there exists a quantity strictly positive such that the scalar this scalar product here is strictly lower than minus phi square. So from the inequality, I obtain that V at the new point, tau bar, is upper bounded by M1, I cannot say more than M1, minus rho phi square, plus rho multiplied by something here, which is rho again, plus tau minus tau bar. I can choose again rho max small enough, delta max small enough, in such a way that this quantity is not no more than 1/2 phi square. And globally, the sum of these two terms is upper bounded by M1. So it is a classical proof, not from my own work, it's a classical proof to distinguish these two steps. Either you are far enough the limiting set, you have a strict decay of the Lyapunov function. It doesn't matter if you don't control very well the error, because you have a strict decay that helps you. Either you are not far enough the limiting set, you are in the red part, light red. In that case, you cannot say you have a strict decay, but you use the fact that you have some margin to allow the noise, to control the noise, and it will be enough to say that maybe you do not remain in the light red, but you do not move away the dark blue. So it is really the idea. So now we prove this by induction. If tau bar T is in this level set, at the next point it will remain in this level set. And the last step, as I said before, is that you use the fact that tau bar and tau are close enough and controlled here again by delta max in such a way that if tau bar is in the dark blue, then tau is in the other one, and here again it relies on a simple Taylor expansion of the Lyapunov function. So this was when I combine everything, what I said is that if you control the step size by some rho max, the cost is 0. As a user, you choose gamma t that decays to 0. So at some points, even if you don't know rho max, because it's a quantity defined in the proof, it doesn't matter. At some points, you will be below this rho max. You don't know when, but it will happen. So rho max, this assumption is really easy. This one has to be proved. So if you are able to control delta t, this expression is there. It was the sum of the cumulated error. So if you are able to show that this delta t is bounded, in that case, you know that the mechanism will produce a sequence tau t. This one is not interesting for you, but for the algorithm, but the sequence tau t will remain in some level set. And since your algorithm at the beginning is defining a sequence of growing level set, even if you don't know which level set of V it is, it doesn't matter. At some times, you will cover this level set, and so at some time, your algorithm, the compact set will be here large enough in such a way that it will contain this unknown level set of V. So now the technical part, of course, is to prove that the noise delta t, the cumulated error, is small enough. And in practice, to do that, so it's small enough for the sequence rho. The sequence rho is any sequence, any shifted sequence, so gamma I plus something. Here I write what happens. It's a notation to describe what happens between stops and restart. When I stop and restart, I start an algorithm from theta init and x init with a sequence shifted by I. That is what is said by this notation. And I want to say that when I increases, since gamma t goes to 0 by assumption, this quantity, hopefully, has to go, this probability has to go to 0 if I want to make this chain stabilization technique useful. I don't detail more than that. In practice, now to prove this kind of property, what can be done is classically to use a Markov inequality to upper bound the probability by an expectation. And after that, you see that you have to control the expectation of gamma square, which is deterministic, it's not a problem, and here again, but the expectation of quantity here, eta k is random, and eta k is a function of xk and theta k, and you use all the tricks I introduced yesterday. You use the Poisson equation, you use the fact that your transition kernel has to be ergodic enough. You use the fact that you have the containment condition, you assume that you have the containment condition on the kernel, that you have the diminishing adaptation, which is mechanically, not exactly mechanically because you have this term to control, but you assume that you have all these conditions in order to be able to prove this kind of condition. But, which is fundamental for our proof, is that you have to prove this kind of controls along this event, which is really nice because in this event, you say that your parameter theta remain in the compact. It doesn't matter if you don't know which compact. It is enough to show this property on any compact set. Fixed, not deterministic, but any compact set. If you have this property along any compact set, it's nice. And so you conclude. And you see that the main advantage of this reprojection is that of this stop and restart technique, is that theta is in the compact set, and so maybe you can apply the simple set of conditions introduced yesterday, that is a uniform in theta ergodicity conditions. It is on the point of view of the proof, this is the major interest of the chain techniques. On the point of view of the implementation of the user, the main interest of the projection technique is that it makes a stable sequence and it self-tunes the step size gamma, because it automatically decreases the step size until it feels that it is small enough. It feels by itself, the algorithm feels by itself that the step size is small enough. Okay, so just to slide to say that I comment a lot what happens for stability. What happens for convergence is exactly on the same scheme, and I don't say that. I want to say that in the literature, what exists about stochastic approximation with these controlled Markovian sampling points is about sufficient weaker conditions for stability and convergence, weaker conditions that what I introduced here. There also exist central limit theorems on this kind of stochastic approximation scheme, including the reprojection technique, I think. But also a central limit theorem for the average sequence. For people who are familiar, you know that sometimes it's far better to use as an estimate of the limiting point the average, the Cesaro mean, instead of the point itself. There also exists, but for a very specific model, there also exists some convergence result when the step size sequence is random, but it is really for specific mechanism of adaptation of the gamma t. And finally, there also exists this context, the studies on the stochastic approximation in distributed situation, when you have many agents, each of them run their own stochastic approximation scheme, and sometimes there is a gossip, and you converge to some what we say, I forget the name, but everybody estimates the same thing. Thank you. Consensus. And finally, just the last, to open a recent work I did, but I do not speak about that this afternoon. A recent work is results of uncertainty quantification in stochastic approximation. Stochastic approximation is designed to solve this kind of problem, finding a root theta of this function. It may happen that the definition of the function itself depends on some parameter. You don't know which one is the better to model your problem. But you have an a priori on this parameter. So one solution is to say for each possible value of the parameter, I determine the root. But you see that if you have a continuum value, a set, if the parameter is on the real line, it's not possible to choose this strategy, and you would like a far more efficient strategy, is to say, is there a mechanism to determine the root for each value of v, which means to determine a function of v. And so yes, which means that in that case, you have to run a stochastic approximation algorithm in a function space. You do not update a vector of finite dimension, you update a function. So what does it mean in practice when you implement on a computer updating a function? And the strategy is to use a chaos expansion to say that you update the components of a function on a basis, on a countable basis. But here again, what does it mean updating a countable number of points? The solution we propose, and we prove that asymptotically it works, the solution is to say that at every iteration, the algorithm updates a fixed number of parameters, but this fixed number of components, but this fixed number increases, and so asymptotically it turns to a countable number, and so to the estimation not of the projection of the function on a finite number of bases, but to the function in a very nice functional space. Thank you.